The morning I found the hotel receipt in my wife's purse, I was making her favorite coffee, Ethiopian blend, 2 sugars, splash of cream, like the devoted husband I'd been for 15 years. The irony wasn't lost on me later. There I was, grinding beans at 6 a.m., while she slept off what she'd told me was a client dinner. But what the crumpled paper revealed was room 219 at the Lakeside Inn. Funny how your whole world can collapse over a $47 receipt. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Alex Regan, and I live in Lakewood, a pristine suburb where everyone's lawn is greener than their neighbors, and so is their envy. I'm a software engineer, which in Lakewood terms makes me about as exciting as watching paint dry on a beige wall. My wife Marta, however, is a PR executive with the kind of polished smile that can sell ice to Eskimos, and apparently herself to her co-workers. Alex, did you remember the dry cleaning? Marta swept into the kitchen like a perfectly choreographed storm, all sharp angles in her designer suit. At 39, she still turned heads, though lately, I'd noticed she was more interested in turning them away from me. On the counter, I said, studying her face. Did cheaters develop tells? Did their eyes dart left when they lied? Because hers were doing exactly that. Thanks. I'll be late tonight. Another client meeting. There it was again, that slight twitch when she said client. I handed her the coffee, and she barely acknowledged it. 15 years of marriage, and I'd become invisible. Our son Ross, 17 and perpetually buried in his phone, mumbled something resembling a goodbye. Our daughter Amelia, 15 and sharp as a tack, caught my eye and rolled hers toward her mother. Kids see everything adults pretend they don't. Have a great day, honey, I called after Marta. She was already gone. I sat at our granite kitchen island. Marta had insisted on granite, said it was more aesthetic, and pulled out the receipt. Lakeside Inn, room 219, checked in at 2 p.m., checked out at 4 p.m., during what she'd claimed was a lunch meeting with the Morrison account. The Morrison account that had been closed for 6 months. My phone buzzed. Paul, my best friend since college, and the only person in Lakewood who found my sarcasm amusing rather than offensive. Coffee? I've got news about your better half. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Paul at Grind Coffee, Lakewood's attempt at urban sophistication. Paul had been a lawyer once, before he decided bartending was more honest work. He had the kind of weathered face that came from listening to too many sob stories and the wisdom that came from serving them alcohol. So, he said, stirring his coffee with the deliberate slowness of someone about to deliver bad news, you know how you asked me to keep an ear out about Marta? Please tell me she's not embezzling funds to support a secret gambling addiction. I can't afford that kind of excitement. Worse, she's been seen around town with Greg Duffy, a lot, and not in a discussing quarterly reports kind of way. Greg Duffy, Marta's ambitious co-worker with the red Mustang and the gym membership he wore like a badge of honor, the kind of guy who called everyone buddy and meant it as a threat. Define a lot, I said, though the receipt in my pocket had already defined it pretty clearly. 3 times this week at Luigi's, twice at the wine bar on 5th, and yesterday Jen Morrison saw them at the Lakeside Inn. Paul's expression was grim. I'm sorry, man. Jen Morrison, Lakewood's unofficial gossip coordinator and the kind of woman who could spot infidelity from 3 blocks away. If she'd seen them, half the town knew by now. Well, I said, raising my coffee cup in a mock toast, here's to 15 years of marriage. Apparently, I've been participating in a monogamous relationship while my wife's been conducting market research. Paul didn't laugh. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What does a software engineer from Lakewood do when he discovers his wife is cheating with her coworker? The conventional wisdom suggested tears, shouting, maybe a dramatic confrontation. But I've never been conventional. I'm going to think about it, I said. carefully. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze of normalcy. I worked on debugging code for a client's inventory system, attended a video conference about server optimization, and picked up groceries for dinner, all while my marriage crumbled in the background like a poorly written program. That evening, as I watched Marta push her salmon around her plate while texting someone, Greg, presumably, I made my decision. I wasn't going to be the cuckolded husband who went quietly into that good night. I was going to be something far more dangerous, a software engineer with time, resources, and absolutely nothing left to lose. "How was your client meeting?" I asked pleasantly. "Fine," she said without looking up from her phone. "Productive." "That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're finding work fulfilling." She finally looked at me then, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt. Or maybe it was just indigestion from the salmon. "I think I'll take Mom to that wedding expo this weekend," I continued. Help her plan something nice for her anniversary party." Marta's face tightened. My mother, Diane, was a sweet woman who'd raised 3 kids on a teacher's salary and had never owned anything designer in her life. Marta tolerated her the way one tolerates a persistent hangnail. "That's nice," Marta said, her voice flat. "I'm sure she'll appreciate it." What she didn't say, but what hung in the air like smoke, was that she wouldn't be there to help. She'd be busy, with work, with Greg, with anything that didn't involve acknowledging that she'd married into a family she considered beneath her newly elevated status. That night, as Marta slept beside me, or pretended to sleep, I stared at the ceiling and planned. Software engineering had taught me that every problem had a solution. You just had to approach it systematically. Break it down into manageable components, identify the variables, execute the code. My marriage was broken beyond repair, that much was clear. But that didn't mean I had to let Marta and Greg walk away unscathed. They'd made their choices, now they could live with the consequences. In Lakewood, reputation was everything. Social standing was currency, and I was about to crash their market. The wedding expo was held at the Lakewood Community Center, a building that managed to look both expensive and soulless, much like the town itself. Mom had been excited about planning her 40th anniversary party, something she and Dad had been saving for since their 35th. 40 years of marriage deserved celebration, I figured, especially when it was the real thing. "Oh, Alex, look at these centerpieces," Mom said, pointing to an elaborate display of roses and baby's breath. "Aren't they lovely?" "They're perfect, Mom. Dad's going to love whatever you choose." The vendor, a woman with the kind of aggressive smile that came from working on commission, immediately launched into her sales pitch. "We can do these arrangements for $200 per table. How many tables are you planning?" "Well," Mom said, looking suddenly uncertain, "we were thinking maybe 6 tables, for the family and close friends." I could see her doing the math in her head, watching the numbers climb beyond what she'd budgeted. 40 years of marriage, and she was worried about spending too much on the celebration. "That sounds perfect," I said quickly. "Let's book it." "Alex, you don't need to—" "Mom, it's your anniversary. You deserve beautiful centerpieces." That's when Marta appeared, looking like she'd stepped off the pages of a magazine. She'd claimed she had to work, but apparently her definition of work included wedding expo attendance. She wasn't alone. "Alex, what are you doing here?" Her voice had that carefully modulated tone she used when she was caught off guard. "Helping Mom plan her anniversary party. What are you doing here?" "Client research," she said smoothly. "We're handling the Whitman wedding account." The Whitman wedding. I made a mental note to look that up later. Greg appeared behind her, all teeth and cologne, wearing the kind of casual outfit that cost more than most people's rent. "Hey, buddy," he said, extending his hand like we were old friends. "Great to see you." I shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip, the way he held it just a second too long. Alpha male, posturing from a man who was sleeping with my wife. The irony was almost amusing. Greg, fancy meeting you here. Don't you usually spend Saturdays at the gym? His smile faltered slightly. Taking a break today, helping Marta with this client thing. How dedicated of you both. Mom, bless her heart, was completely oblivious to the undercurrents. Marta, dear, what do you think of these centerpieces? Alex is being so generous, but I want to make sure they're not too fancy. Marta glanced at the arrangements with the kind of look she usually reserved for expired milk. They're nice, Diane. Very traditional. Traditional is good, Mom said hopefully. I want something elegant but not too flashy. What do you think about the seating? We were planning to have a head table for family. A head table? Marta's voice sharpened. Diane, that's so outdated. Nobody does head tables anymore. It's not very aesthetic. The word aesthetic came out like a diagnosis. Mom's face fell, and I felt something cold and angry settle in my chest. I think a head table sounds perfect, I said evenly. It honors the family, the people who matter most. It's just that modern events are more fluid, Marta continued, apparently unable to stop herself. More sophisticated. A head table is so, well, it's something my grandmother would have done. Mom's cheeks flushed red. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was so old-fashioned. Maybe we should look at something else. No, I said, my voice cutting through the conversation like a blade. We're not looking at something else. We're doing exactly what you want, Mom. A head table for family. For the people who've loved you for 40 years. Marta's eyes flashed. Alex, I was just suggesting. I know exactly what you were suggesting. And I think we're done here. The vendor, sensing the tension, had wisely retreated to help other customers. Greg was studying his phone with sudden, intense interest. Mom looked like she wanted to disappear. Maybe I should go, Mom said quietly. No, Mom. We're going to finish planning your party. Marta and Greg can get back to their client research. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Other shoppers were starting to notice, the kind of attention Marta usually craved, but not under these circumstances. Fine, Marta said finally. We'll see you at home, Alex. They left together, Greg's hand briefly touching Marta's lower back as they walked away, a gesture small enough to be dismissed as friendly, intimate enough to confirm what I already knew. I'm sorry, honey, Mom said after they were gone. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause anything, Mom. Some people just don't understand the value of tradition, of loyalty, of keeping promises. We finished the planning in relative peace. 6 tables, beautiful centerpieces, a head table for family. Everything Mom wanted and deserved. The total came to more than she'd budgeted, but I covered the difference without mentioning it. 40 years of marriage deserved celebration, especially when it was built on something real. That evening, Marta was waiting for me in the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral. We need to talk about what happened today. Do we? I thought it was pretty clear. Mom wanted a head table. You thought it wasn't aesthetic enough. I disagreed. You embarrassed me in front of Greg. Did I? I thought I was defending my mother from someone who was being unnecessarily cruel about her anniversary party. Marta's mask slipped slightly. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. Your mother has no sense of style, Alex. She never has. And enabling her just makes things worse. There it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind polite smiles and careful words for years. My mother, who'd worked double shifts to put food on the table, who'd saved every penny for this anniversary party, wasn't good enough for Marta's aesthetic standards. You're right, I said calmly. Mom doesn't have a sense of style. She has something better. She has character. She has loyalty. She honors her commitments. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. Someone who could insult my mother's taste while sneaking around with her co-worker. Someone who valued aesthetics over authenticity, appearance over substance. It means exactly what you think it means, Marta. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. Finally, she turned and walked away. I'm going to bed. We'll talk about this later. But we wouldn't talk about it later, because I was done talking. It was time for action, and I had a plan that would be far more effective than words. In software development, we have a saying, garbage in, garbage out. Marta had been feeding garbage into our marriage for months, maybe years. Now it was time to see what kind of output that produced. Monday morning brought the kind of revelation that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your life. I was in my home office, supposedly working on a database optimization project, when I decided to do a little research on the Whitman wedding account Marta had mentioned. It took exactly 3 minutes to discover that the Whitman wedding had been canceled 2 months ago. The bride had posted about it on social media, citing irreconcilable differences and thanking everyone for their understanding. So much for Marta's client research, but that was just the beginning. Once you start pulling threads, the whole sweater unravels pretty quickly. My phone rang. Paul. You need to meet me for lunch, now. Can it wait? I'm in the middle of... Trust me, Alex. You want to hear this in person. An hour later, I was sitting across from Paul at Rossetti's, a little Italian place where the food was good and the booths were private. Paul looked like he'd aged 5 years since our last conversation. I did some digging, he said without preamble, about Marta and Greg. And? It's worse than we thought. He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. This is from Lisa Chen's Instagram story from last Thursday. Look at the background. I squinted at the image. Lisa was holding up a cocktail at what looked like the Lakewood Wine Bar, but in the background, barely visible, were 2 figures at a corner table. A woman with dark hair in a designer blouse. A man with Greg's distinctive jawline. Could be anyone, I said, though I knew it wasn't. Could be, except Lisa tagged the location and time. Thursday, 7 p.m., the same night Marta told you she was working late on the Morrison proposal. The Morrison proposal, for the Morrison account that had been closed for 6 months. I was starting to see a pattern. There's more, Paul continued. I talked to my buddy Mike who tends bar at Luigi's. He says they've been regulars for about 3 months. Always the corner booth, always paying cash, always leaving separately. 3 months, while I was debugging code and picking up groceries and making Ethiopian coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. And here's the kicker, Paul said, his voice dropping. Mike says last week Greg was talking to another customer about some big promotion coming up at his company. Something about a new position opening up because they were restructuring the department. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What kind of restructuring? The kind where they eliminate positions. Specifically, according to Greg, positions held by people who don't fit the company culture. Marta worked in PR. She would know about restructuring before it was announced. She would know which positions were being eliminated, which new ones were being created. And if she was feeding information to Greg, you think she's helping him get promoted? I think she's helping him get promoted by getting rid of his competition. And I think you might want to check your own employment situation. That afternoon, I made a call to my contact at Marta's company. Janet worked in HR and had always been friendly when we'd met at company parties. She was also the kind of person who believed in giving people a heads up when trouble was brewing. Alex, I'm glad you called, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I was actually going to reach out to you. Oh? There's been a situation, some complaints filed about your wife's professional conduct. Nothing formal yet, but there's going to be an investigation. What kind of complaints? I can't go into details, but let's just say there are questions about conflicts of interest, inappropriate relationships with coworkers, misuse of company information. So I wasn't the only one who'd noticed Marta's new friendship with Greg. The difference was, her coworkers were taking it seriously. Is her job in danger? I can't say for certain, but… Alex, if I were you, I'd make sure my own affairs were in order. This kind of thing has a way of spreading. That evening, I made dinner as usual. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a nice bottle of wine. Marta came home at 8, claiming she'd been stuck in traffic. How was work? I asked pleasantly. Fine. Busy, the usual. Any interesting developments with the team? She looked up sharply. What do you mean? Just wondering if there are any changes coming. New projects, new positions, that sort of thing. Not that I know of. But her voice had that careful quality again, the one that meant she was editing her words. That's good. Stability is important in a marriage, don't you think? Trust. Honesty. Knowing that your partner has your back. Marta set down her fork. Alex, what's this about? Nothing specific. I've just been thinking about what's important. What really matters when you've been married for 15 years. And what conclusion have you reached? I smiled at her, the kind of smile I used to give her when she'd done something that made me proud. Back when I was proud of her. I've concluded that some people understand the value of commitment, and some people don't. Some people honor their promises, and some people treat them like suggestions. You're being cryptic. Am I? I thought I was being pretty clear. She stared at me for a long moment, then returned to her dinner. But I noticed she barely ate anything, and she kept checking her phone, probably texting Greg about her strange husband and his even stranger conversation. After dinner, I retreated to my office and opened my laptop. Time for some real research. It's amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Social media posts, tagged locations, credit card statements from our joint account. A pattern emerged pretty quickly. Every late meeting corresponded to a charge at a restaurant or bar. Every client dinner happened on nights when Greg had posted about being out with a special friend. They weren't even being careful about it. They were so confident in their deception that they'd gotten sloppy. Arrogant. That was going to be their downfall. I opened a new document and started typing. Not a letter, not an email, a plan. Step by step, methodical and thorough, like any good code. Input, processing, output. The input was clear. A cheating wife and her ambitious lover. The processing would take some time, but I had resources they didn't know about. The output was going to be spectacular. The thing about living in a small town like Lakewood is that secrets have a half-life of about 48 hours. After that, they start to decay, spreading radioactive gossip through coffee shops and book clubs until everyone's contaminated with the knowledge. I was counting on it. Wednesday morning, I made a decision that would have seemed insane a week earlier. I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I had a different kind of job to do, the kind that required careful timing and absolute precision. My first stop was the Lakewood Community Center, where I had a meeting with the event coordinator about Mom's anniversary party. Her name was Susan, and she had the kind of cheerful efficiency that made things happen. Mr. Regan, so nice to see you again. How can I help you today? I wanted to make some changes to my mother's event. Upgrades, actually. Wonderful. What did you have in mind? I'd like to move it to the grand ballroom instead of the smaller space. Add a champagne reception, maybe upgrade the dinner menu. Susan's eyes lit up. Dollar signs had that effect on event planners. That sounds lovely. The grand ballroom is available that evening. It would accommodate up to 200 guests instead of 60. Perfect. Send the new contract to this email address. I handed her a card with my personal email, not the family one Marta had access to. And Susan? I'd appreciate if we could keep this between us for now. I want it to be a surprise. Of course. Your mother is going to be thrilled. My second stop was the bank, where I moved half of our joint savings into a separate account. Perfectly legal since my name was on both accounts, and strategically wise given what I suspected was coming. My third stop was the most important one, Luigi's restaurant, where I had a lunch meeting with someone who could help me with the next phase of my plan. Her name was Rebecca Torres, and she ran a small but influential blog called Lakewood Life that covered local events, business news, and what she diplomatically called community happenings. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Rebecca was the unofficial archivist of that business. "Alex, I have to say, I was surprised when you called," she said over her Caesar salad. "You've never struck me as the type to court publicity. I'm not, usually, but I have a story I think your readers might find interesting." "Oh? What kind of story?" "The kind about professional ethics, conflicts of interest, the way some people use their positions to benefit themselves at the expense of others." Rebecca's journalistic instincts kicked in immediately. "Are we talking about a specific situation?" "We're talking about a hypothetical situation where someone in a position of trust might use confidential information to help a romantic partner advance their career. Hypothetically. That would be quite serious. Hypothetically. It would be, especially if that same person was using company resources to conduct personal business, meeting clients who don't exist, charging personal expenses to company accounts, that sort of thing." Rebecca set down her fork. "Alex, are we talking about someone I know?" "We're talking about someone everyone knows. Someone who's built a reputation on being professional, trustworthy, ethical. Someone whose fall from grace would be significant." "I see. And you have evidence of these hypothetical activities?" I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of credit card statements, screenshots of social media posts, a timeline that showed a clear pattern of deception. "This is quite thorough," Rebecca said, flipping through the pages. "Very comprehensive. I believe in being thorough. It's a professional habit. And you're comfortable with me using this information?" "I'm comfortable with the truth being told. People have a right to know when someone they trust is betraying that trust." Rebecca closed the folder. "I'll need to verify some of this independently, make some calls, check some facts." "Of course, take all the time you need. The truth isn't going anywhere." That evening, Marta came home earlier than usual, looking agitated. She'd barely walked through the door when her phone started ringing. "Hello? Oh, hi, Janet. What? No, I haven't heard anything about... What kind of questions?" I continued making dinner, but I was listening to every word. Janet from HR asking questions. The investigation was moving faster than I'd expected. "I don't understand," Marta was saying. "Who would make accusations like that?" "No, I haven't been... That's completely unprofessional to even suggest." She hung up and stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale. "Problem at work?" I asked innocently. "Someone's been spreading rumors, lies about me and Greg. Janet says there's going to be a formal review of my conduct." "That sounds serious. What kind of lies?" "Stupid gossip, people saying we're having an affair, that I'm giving him inside information about promotions. It's ridiculous." "It is ridiculous," I agreed. "I mean, you would never do something like that. You have too much integrity." She looked at me sharply, trying to read my expression. "Exactly. I would never compromise my professional standards for personal reasons." "Of course not. You're far too ethical for that. Too honest." "Alex, you're being weird again." "Am I? I'm just agreeing with you. You're absolutely right to be upset about these false accusations. Your reputation is everything in your line of work." "It is, and I intend to fight this. Find out who's spreading these lies and make them pay for it." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds like a good plan. I'm sure the truth will come out eventually. It always does." That night, as Marta tossed and turned beside me, I stared at the ceiling and smiled. Phase 1 was complete. The seeds of doubt had been planted, the investigation was underway, and the gossip mill was starting to churn. But I was just getting started. Tomorrow would bring Phase 2, and that's when things would get really interesting. In software development, we call it cascading failure. One small error leads to another, which leads to another, until the entire system collapses. Marta and Greg had introduced an error into their lives when they decided to betray me. Now I was going to let that error cascade until their whole world came crashing down. Thursday morning brought the kind of phone call that changes everything. I was in my office, pretending to work on a client's database while actually monitoring the early stages of what I'd come to think of as Operation Aesthetic, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Alex Regan, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Lakewood Police Department. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your wife's employment situation. My blood went cold. My wife's employment? Is she in some kind of trouble? Not necessarily. We're investigating some irregularities at her company, financial discrepancies that might involve misuse of company resources. Your name came up as someone who might have relevant information. Financial discrepancies. That was interesting. I'd focused on the affair and the professional misconduct, but apparently there were other issues I hadn't uncovered. I'm not sure how I can help, Detective. I don't know much about my wife's day-to-day work activities. That's fine. Could you come down to the station this afternoon, just to answer a few routine questions? After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and tried to process this development. A police investigation suggested something more serious than office gossip and inappropriate relationships. It suggested actual crimes. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Paul. You need to see the news. Now. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Lakewood Herald website. The headline made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Local PR executive under investigation for fraud, embezzlement. The article was brief but damning. Marta's company had discovered significant financial irregularities in several client accounts. Funds had been diverted, invoices had been falsified, and company credit cards had been used for personal expenses. The investigation was ongoing, but sources suggested that arrests were imminent. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she was stealing money. I called Paul immediately. Did you know about this? I demanded. I had no idea. This is way bigger than an affair, Alex. If she's been embezzling funds, she's looking at serious prison time. Prison time. The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever I'd been planning, whatever revenge I'd been orchestrating, it suddenly seemed insignificant compared to this. There's more, Paul continued. I talked to my buddy at the courthouse. Word is they're going to arrest her today, at work, in front of everyone. I thought about Ross and Amelia at school right now, probably hearing about this from their classmates before I could tell them myself. I thought about my mother, planning her anniversary party while her daughter-in-law's life imploded in spectacular fashion. Alex, you still there? Yeah, I'm here, just processing. Listen, you need to think about protecting yourself. If she's been using joint accounts for illegal activities, you could be implicated. That's when it hit me. The credit card statements I'd been analyzing, looking for evidence of her affair. Some of those restaurant charges, those hotel bills, if she'd been using company cards and then reimbursing herself from our joint account, I might be considered an accessory. I hung up with Paul and immediately called my lawyer. Then I called the kids' schools and asked them to keep Ross and Amelia after classes until I could pick them up. Then I sat in my office and waited for my world to finish collapsing. At 2:47 p.m., my phone rang. Marta, sobbing hysterically. Alex, you have to help me. They arrested me at work. Everyone saw. The police, the handcuffs, everything. It's all over social media. Marta, slow down. What exactly are they charging you with? Embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy. Alex, I didn't do anything wrong. This is all a misunderstanding. But even as she said it, I could hear the lie in her voice. The same careful modulation she'd used when talking about client meetings and work trips. Where are you now? At the police station. They're processing me. My lawyer says I might be able to make bail, but it's going to be expensive. How expensive? $50,000. $50,000. The exact amount I'd moved from our joint savings account the day before. Marta, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you use any of our personal accounts for company business? Any transfers, any reimbursements? Anything that might look suspicious?" The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "Marta? There might have been some commingling of funds, but it was all legitimate business expenses. I was going to sort it out." Commingling of funds. That was lawyer speak for, yes, I committed fraud and tried to cover it up using our joint accounts. "I can't help you," I said quietly. "What do you mean you can't help me? I'm your wife." "You were my wife. Right now, you're someone who's been arrested for embezzlement and who apparently used our joint accounts to cover up financial crimes. My lawyer is going to advise me to distance myself from this situation as much as possible." "Alex, please. I know things have been difficult between us, but—" "Difficult? Marta, you've been having an affair with Greg for months. You've been lying to me about client meetings and work trips. And now I find out you've been stealing money and potentially implicating me in your crimes. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it." Another long silence. "You know about Greg." "I've known about Greg for weeks. The hotel receipts, the restaurant charges, the fake client meetings. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" "Alex, I can explain—" "No, you can't, because there's no explanation that makes this okay. There's no excuse for betraying your family, your employer, and apparently the law. So you're just going to abandon me?" I thought about that question. A week ago, I might have said yes out of anger. But sitting there, listening to her sob into the phone from a police station, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. "I'm not abandoning you, Marta. I'm protecting myself and our children from the consequences of your choices. There's a difference." I hung up and called my lawyer back. Then I picked up the kids from school and took them to their favorite ice cream place, where I explained that their mother had made some serious mistakes and was going to have to face the consequences. Ross took it stoically, the way 17-year-olds do when they're trying to be adult about adult problems. Amelia cried, but not for the reasons I expected. "I'm not surprised," she said through her tears. "I've known something was wrong for months. She's been different, meaner, like she thought she was better than us." That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in my office and deleted the files I'd compiled about Marta and Greg, the screenshots, the timelines, the evidence of their affair. It all seemed irrelevant now. The perfect revenge I'd been planning was nothing compared to what Marta had done to herself. She'd destroyed her own life more thoroughly than I ever could have. But there was still one loose end to tie up. Friday morning brought a knock on my door that I'd been expecting. Greg Duffy stood on my front porch, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His usual polish was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of a man watching his world burn. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Do we? I thought you'd be busy looking for a new job or a good lawyer." "Alex, please, let me come in." I stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around our living room like he was seeing it for the first time, taking in the family photos, the kids' artwork on the refrigerator, the comfortable chaos of a real home. "Nice place," he said awkwardly. "It's home. Or it was anyway. What do you want, Greg?" He sat down heavily on our couch, running his hands through his hair. "I want to explain. About Marta and me. About everything." "I'm listening." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The thing between us, it just developed. We were working late, spending a lot of time together on projects, and one thing led to another." "How romantic. A modern love story for the ages." "I know you're angry." "Am I? I'm not sure anger is the right word anymore. Disappointed, maybe. Disgusted, certainly. But angry? That would require me to care more than I do." Greg flinched like I'd slapped him. "She loves you, you know. Even with everything that's happened, she still talks about you, about your marriage." Funny way of showing it, having an affair and committing felonies. "The money thing, that wasn't my idea. That was all Marta. She said she needed to show results, needed to look successful for the promotion she was after. She started moving funds around, creating fake invoices, padding expense reports. I told her it was dangerous, but she wouldn't listen. So you're innocent in all this? I didn't know how far she'd gone until yesterday. I thought it was just some creative accounting, maybe some questionable expense reports. I had no idea she was stealing actual money. I studied his face, looking for tells, for signs of deception, but all I saw was genuine fear and regret. What about the promotion, the one she was helping you get? Greg looked genuinely confused. What promotion? I never asked her to help me with anything career-related. If anything, I told her we needed to be more careful about people seeing us together at work. But the information she was giving you— What information? Alex, I think you've got the wrong idea about what was happening between us. I sat back, processing this new information. Had I been wrong about that part of it? Had I assumed a level of professional conspiracy that didn't actually exist? Then what was it? Just an affair? Just an affair. He laughed bitterly. Like that's not enough to destroy everything. Your marriage, my relationship with my girlfriend, both our careers, just an affair. We sat in silence for a moment, two men whose lives had been upended by the same woman's choices. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Because I wanted you to know that I never intended for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you or your kids. And because I wanted to apologize for whatever that's worth. It's worth something, I admitted. Not much, but something. Greg stood up, looking around the room one more time. She's going to need help, you know. With the legal bills, with everything. She's not a bad person, Alex. She just made some terrible choices. We all make choices, Greg. The question is whether we're willing to live with the consequences. After he left, I called my mother to check on the anniversary party plans. She'd heard about Marta's arrest, of course. Everyone in Lakewood had heard about it by now. And she was worried about me and the kids. Are you sure you still want to have the party? She asked. With everything that's happening, maybe we should postpone. Mom, we're having the party. Exactly as planned. You and Dad have been married for 40 years. That deserves to be celebrated, especially now. But people will talk. Let them talk. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Your son married someone who made bad choices, but that doesn't reflect on you or Dad or your marriage. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm not, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm sorry it happened to Ross and Amelia, and I'm sorry it happened to you and Dad. But for me, I'm actually relieved. Now I know the truth. Now I can move forward. That evening, Rebecca Torres called to tell me her article about corporate fraud and professional misconduct would be running in Sunday's paper. It was a comprehensive piece about the culture of corruption that could develop in small companies, using Marta's case as a cautionary tale. I want to thank you, she said, for bringing this to light. If you hadn't spoken up, she might have gotten away with it. I didn't do it for revenge, I told her. I did it because people deserved to know the truth. Either way, you did the right thing. Saturday morning, I took Ross and Amelia to visit their mother at the county jail. It was awkward and painful, but necessary. They needed to see her, to understand that despite everything she'd done, she was still their mother. Marta looked terrible. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The careful makeup was gone, revealing the lines and exhaustion underneath. But when she saw the kids, her face lit up with genuine love. I'm so sorry, she told them through the glass partition. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Why did you do it, Mom? Amelia asked, her voice small. I don't know, baby. I wanted things to be perfect, wanted to be successful, wanted people to respect me. I made some bad choices trying to get there. What's going to happen to you? Ross asked. I don't know yet. My lawyer thinks I might be able to make a deal, maybe serve some time in minimum security. But I want you both to know that whatever happens, I love you. That will never change. On the drive home, both kids were quiet. Finally, Amelia spoke up. Dad, are you going to divorce Mom? Probably, sweetheart. But that doesn't change the fact that we're still a family. You and Ross and me, we're going to be okay. Will we still live in our house? For now. We'll see what happens after the legal stuff gets sorted out. That night, as I tucked Amelia into bed, she asked me one more question. Dad, do you hate Mom? I thought about it carefully before answering. No, honey. I don't hate her. I'm disappointed in her, and I'm angry about the choices she made, but I don't hate her. Hate takes too much energy, and I'd rather spend that energy taking care of you and your brother. Sunday morning brought Rebecca's article, which was picked up by several regional papers and news websites. By noon, my phone was ringing with calls from reporters wanting to know more about the Lakewood fraud case. I declined all interviews. This wasn't about publicity or revenge anymore. It was about moving forward, about building a new life for me and my kids. Sunday evening, exactly 1 week after I'd found that hotel receipt, I sat in my office and wrote an email to the event coordinator at the community center. Susan, I wanted to confirm that we're still on for my parents' anniversary party next Saturday. All the upgrades we discussed, the champagne reception, the grand ballroom, it's going to be perfect. Exactly what they deserve. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. Outside, Lakewood was settling into its Sunday evening routine. Families were having dinner, kids were doing homework, couples were watching TV together. Normal life, continuing despite the drama and scandal that had consumed my world for the past week. Tomorrow, I would start looking for a new job. Maybe something in a different town, a fresh start for me and the kids. Tomorrow, I would call a divorce lawyer and start the process of officially ending my marriage to Marta. But tonight, I was going to sit in my office and plan my parents' anniversary party. A celebration of 40 years of real love, real commitment, real partnership. The kind of marriage I'd thought I had, the kind I hoped to have again someday. The kind that understood the difference between aesthetic and authentic, between appearance and substance. The kind that honored its promises and kept its word. The kind that lasted. The grand ballroom at the Lakewood Community Center had never looked more beautiful. 200 guests filled the space, celebrating 40 years of marriage between two people who understood what commitment really meant. Mom looked radiant in her new dress, Dad distinguished in his best suit. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends, family, and neighbors who genuinely loved them. The head table was perfect, elegant but not flashy, traditional but not outdated. Exactly what Mom had wanted from the beginning. I stood at the back of the room, watching my parents dance to the same song they'd danced to at their wedding 4 decades earlier. Ross and Amelia flanked me, both dressed up and smiling despite everything our family had been through. They look happy, Amelia observed. They are happy, I said. That's what real love looks like. Paul appeared beside me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Hell of a party, Alex. Your parents look like they're having the time of their lives. They deserve it. After everything they've been through, everything they've built together, they deserve to celebrate. What about you? You doing okay? I thought about the question. A week ago, I would have said no. My marriage was over, my wife was in jail, my life was in shambles. But standing here, watching my parents celebrate 4 decades of genuine partnership, I realized something had shifted. Yeah, I said. I think I am okay. For the first time in months, maybe years, I'm okay. The DJ announced the last dance, and couples moved onto the floor. I watched my parents, still holding each other close after all these years, still looking at each other like they were the only people in the room. That's what I wanted. Not the perfect house or the perfect image or the perfect aesthetic. Just someone who would look at me the way my father looked at my mother. Someone who understood that love wasn't about appearances or status or what other people thought. Someone who understood that promises mattered. Someone who would still be there for the 40th anniversary. As the music ended and the guests began to leave, Mom came over to thank me for everything. "This was perfect, Alex. Absolutely perfect. I can't believe you did all this. You deserve perfect, Mom. You and Dad both. I know this has been a difficult time for you, with everything that's happened with Marta, but I want you to know how proud I am of you, how you've handled this whole situation, how you've taken care of the children, how you've kept our family together. We're family, Mom. That's what families do." She hugged me tight, and I realized that despite everything that had happened, despite all the pain and betrayal and public humiliation, I was exactly where I needed to be. Surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not what I could do for them. People who understood the value of loyalty, of honesty, of keeping your word. People who knew the difference between aesthetic and authentic. People who would still be there for the 40th anniversary.